Okay, good moed, ma'adim l'simcha. I am Mordechai Becher. I am not Rabbi Gottlieb. I'm sorry for the disappointment. I'll be happy if you want to leave, that's fine. But I will be speaking about the same subject, the esoteric dimension of the Torah. So we'll try to give you a little bit of a, first of all, and I hope it's not too elementary, first of all, a little bit of the history of the Kabbalah, the esoteric dimension of the Torah, some of the great Sforim of the Kabbalah, some of the personalities, and obviously also I will give you some ideas from the esoteric dimension of the Torah as well, and hopefully we'll be able to explain to you the purpose of life, the meaning of life, and everything else. It's not 42. We'll speak about, okay. I see there are some literate people here. That's excellent. Okay. All right. So first of all, the word Kabbalah, which means lekabel, to receive, that which is received. The Ramban Nachmanides, one of the great Kabbalists from Spain, says in the very first sentence in the Torah, Bereshis bara Elokim, in the beginning Hashem created the heaven and the earth. The Ramban there tells us that it's not possible to understand the secrets, the meaning, the true meaning of the verses in the creation story, the verses in Bereshis, unless you have Kabbalah ish mipi ish ad Moshe Rabbeinu alav hashalom. Unless you have a tradition, person to person, back to Moses of blessed memory, v'yodav chayavim lahastira, and those who know it should conceal it. So it's not very helpful for us. But what he does say is, and this is very important, that the word Kabbalah doesn't mean mysticism per se. It means received wisdom. It's not necessarily the type of wisdom that you can figure out from first principles. It's not necessarily the type of thing that you can figure out from observation or scientific experimentation. It's a type of thing that you need a tradition. And this is because it is referring to a dimension which is beyond the realm of the human senses. This is one of the reasons that one of the other names for Kabbalah is Soid, Toras HaSoid. What does Sod mean, Soid? It means secrets. Now, secrets, that which is hidden. But it's interesting, if I tell 10 people a secret, it's no longer a secret. So how many people have studied Kabbalah over the course of history? Certainly in the tens of thousands. So, if so, why is it still called Toras HaSod? Why is it still called secret? So my teacher, Rabbi Shapiro, Oliver Sholem, explained it in the following way. He says, it's called secret because it always is only speaking in allusions or hints, because it's always referring to things a little beyond our experience. It's referring to things a little beyond our senses, which means I can only ever talk about it as a remez, as a hint. I can only ever talk about it as using a moshol, a metaphor. I've never a metaphor I didn't like. And these masholim are what we call sod. It's a secret in the sense that I'm always only hinting to it. I'm always only using metaphors, similes, and allegories, etc. And hence, it has a name Kabbalah, which means, as we said, that which was received because it's received tradition. And secondly, it's called Soid, Toras HaSod, because it's intrinsically referring to things which are beyond our understanding to a great degree. And for example, the Ramban Nachmanides also says in another place in his Perush, his commentary on Chumash, where he's distinguishing between the way the Jews look at the world and the way Aristotle and his students look at the world. He doesn't refer to him by name, he refers to him as Oisoi HaYavoni, the Greek. Right? We know it's not Jimmy the Greek, but so he's referring to Aristotle almost certainly. But in any case, he says, Oisoi Yavoni v'Talmidav, that Greek and his students. He says, he typifies their view. I'm not going to get into a discussion if this is an accurate summary of Aristotelian philosophy, but the Ramban wants to draw the distinction between what is Torah and what is the view of that world. And he says the following, he says, Einam moidim, they only admit l'masha eineim rois, to that which the eye sees. And they only accept as true that which the mind comprehends. In other words, he says there's a certain arrogance to their worldview, which is an arrogance that is found today also in some of the Western world, which is the arrogance of saying that if I don't see it, it's not there. If I don't understand it, it's not true. If it's not part of my experience, it doesn't exist. I remember Moshe Shapiro's one Sukkos actually told us a joke, it wasn't a very good joke, but it's not, from Ottoman era Turkey, that a Turkish captain, and he said this joke as a means of explaining this Ramban. A captain in the Turkish Ottoman Navy was sent from his base somewhere in the Mediterranean, I forgot where it was, to the Isle of Malta. It's an island in the Mediterranean. It used to be the centre of the slave trade. Now it's where they make Playmobil, I think. In any case, he is on his way to Malta, and it is a foggy night, thick fog. He doesn't have radar, obviously, and he gets lost, and he does not get to Malta. He makes his way back to port, and he says, "I'm sorry to report, sir, but Malta does not exist." So, granted, I told you it was an Ottoman-era Turkish joke. They're not known for their sense of humour. So, but in any case, any Turks here, I apologise. But basically, what Rav Moshe was saying is that the attitude of this this Turkish captain was the attitude of much of the Western world, which is, I didn't find it, therefore, doesn't exist. And the Ramban tells us that what the Torah is about is a world that we can experience, but it's not directly necessarily part of our normal, natural experience. And he says, and so I think, according to the Ramban, one of the other ways in which we could, name or describe Kabbalah and the esoteric dimension of the Torah is that it is the total reality versus what we see, which is the partial reality. And there are some analogies to this, which I think we can understand. Astronomy. We look at the night sky. I live in New Jersey, so we see maybe 3 stars through the pollution, etc. Right? But if you live in a relatively normal place like Australia, where I came from, you see thousands of stars, thousands of them. However, and if you go hiking in the Canadian Rockies on the Skyline Trail near Banff, right, did it for 5 days with some friends, then you see even more stars. But the amount of stars and the extent of the visible universe that we can see with the naked eye is such a tiny percentage of the universe as a whole that it's nothing. If I were to believe that what I see of the stars in New Jersey or even in Banff is the totality of reality, I would be under a huge disillusionment. I mean, it's a major lie. It's not true. Simply ridiculous. Right? When you look through a telescope, you'll see that it's even further. You look through the Hubble telescope, you'll see even further. So it goes approximately 14 billion light years distance. I mean, to give you an idea of what that means, light travels 186,550 miles in a second. So multiply that by 60 for a minute, multiply that by another 60 for an hour, by 24 for a day, by 365 and a quarter for a year, by 14 billion. Anyone do the math yet? No, it didn't. Okay, all right. A little disappointed, but okay. So what that means is that what we see, even in terms of the physical universe, is a partial reality. What there is a much vast, greater reality. The same is true, that's true on a macro level, same is true on a micro level. Meaning when I look at the surface of this lectern, it is smooth. Obviously, if I would look at it with a magnifying glass, I would see all types of scratches and all types of, you'd see a whole bunch of, be a different reality. If you would look at this with a microscope, it would be a completely different, you'd see the Grand Canyon, you would see craters, you would see all types of things here. If you would observe this with an electron microscope, it would be a completely different reality. And Rav Moshe Shapiro used to say that that's actually the idea, one of the ideas of nevuah. Nevuah is prophecy. So he says, people think that prophecy is, I can now see things with yet one more sense. It's the same reality, but I'm sensing it with one more sense, i.e. the sense of prophecy. He says it's not so. Because let's imagine for the moment someone who didn't have the dimension or three-dimensional vision or the sense of touch. So as far as they're concerned, the world is flat, the world is two-dimensional, that's it. Now, let's say they are given, there's actually a book about this called Flatlands, if anyone has read it, excellent. Right, let's imagine this person is granted somehow, bestowed upon this person, the sense of three-dimensional vision and the sense of touch. Is he now seeing the same reality before, just with more senses? Or is he now seeing things as a completely different reality? What he thought before was real was not. What he sees now, that is real. Am I making sense here? So the idea of nevuah is not just a perception of our current reality with one more sense. It's an understanding that our current reality is just not it. There's much more to it than meets the eye or the ear or the nose. So that would be, therefore, we have now three really terms that we could use for Kabbalah. One is Chochmas HaKabbalah, referring to the fact that it is a tradition handed down and can only really be accessed through that Kabbalah, through that tradition. Secondly, Torah Sasod, in that it refers to things beyond human senses and experience, and always can only be talked about in allusions, ramazim, allegories, metaphors. And third, a total reality picture versus only a partial reality picture, the partial reality being only the physical world and the total reality being the spiritual world. In fact, the Ramban, on that very first posuk, very first sentence of the Torah, and I'm sorry if this is too elementary, but he says, when it says that Hashem created shamayim va'aretz, heaven and earth, he says, it does not mean, heaven does not mean the sky, and aretz does not mean earth. He says that's incorrect, although the Rambam understands it that way. But the Ramban says what it means is that the shamayim means the spiritual sphere. Aretz means the physical. That means Alpha Centauri and the various other galaxies that we see and don't see, that's all called Aretz. It's all physical. Shamayim is the spiritual world. So Shamayim Aretz means the spiritual world and the physical world. Just in parentheses, I would like to just mention that Rabbi Shapiro explained the terms Shamayim va'aretz, and this actually relates to what Rabbi Brodowitz was talking about at the end of his shir, is that aretz is related to the word rutz. What does rutz mean? To run. Aretz, the physical world, is the place of pursuit, the place of ratzon, the place where I have desire and I run, I move to pursue that desire. As he mentioned, human is called a mahalech, ambulatory, whereas angels are omdim, stationary creatures. Shamayim, he says, is the plural of a Hebrew word sham. What does sham mean? There. Anyone who's going anywhere, if there's one word which can answer, anyone who ever asks, where are you going? There's one word which could cover every single eventuality, which is sham, there. The end of all shams, the ultimate theirs, is shamayim, the place of every there. We're running here, we're pursuing our desires here, we are working here, we're exercising our free will here, we're making progress here, hopefully, etc., in order to ultimately get sham, every single sham of every single person here and in the entire world, shamayim. So that is, again, the Ramban on that first posuk. Hopefully we'll get back a little bit to that first posuk because that's an important point to talk about in that posuk. So that is something. Now, in terms of the history, when, according to our tradition, when the Torah was given in Har Sinai, as you probably know, the Chamishuchum Shei, 5 books of Moses, is really only the tip of the iceberg of Judaism, and the vast bulk of it is actually beneath the surface, and is what we call Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral tradition. The Torah Sheba'al Peh was what the Jews were doing. Think about it, they're in the desert for 40 years, all the major events happened in the first and last year. What are they doing for 38 years? Like walking out, oh, beautiful sand dune, mate, yeah. Right? I mean, 38 years of that, I go out of my mind. Right? So the answer is, or Chaim and other commentaries say earlier than that as well, but he says it very explicitly, they were absorbing the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral tradition. They were absorbing from the best teachers ever, Moshe, Aaron, Miriam, the Zakanim, Yeshua, Elazar, etc. It's unbelievable. So that's what they were doing, 38 years. They didn't have to worry about food, they didn't have to worry about AC, they didn't have to worry about anything. That was it. They were absorbing the Torah. Part of that oral tradition, part of that Torah Sheba'al Peh is Kabbalah. Meaning that the bulk of our Rishonim and Achronim understand that a section of the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the transmitted Kabbalah tradition from Har Sinai, is what we call loosely Kabbalah, Torah Hasod, total reality. That did not get written down for a long time, like the rest of the Torah Sheba'al Peh. The halachic part of the Torah Sheba'al Peh didn't get written down till about 170 to 200 of the Common Era by Rabbi Yehuda Nasi in the form of the Mishnah. That's the halachic part. The ethical, the narrative part of the Torah Sheba'al Peh did not get written down until around the same time in the form of various collections of midrashim, Medrash Rabbah, Medrash Tanchuma, etc., etc. Some of it didn't get written down till the time of the Gaonim, later on in Bavel, in the academies of Sura and Pumbedisa. The central text of the Kabbalah, known as the Zohar, didn't get written down till around approximately the same time as the Mishnah. Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, as we are told, running away from Roman persecution, hid in a cave with his son, learned Torah, taught his son. He had an elite, when he got out, he had an elite group of Talmidim, an assembly, Rabbah, Zuta, and he taught these people sitting in a circle, this circle of Talmidim, and he taught them the Torah HaKabbalah, Torah HaSod. And it was eventually written down in the form of what's called the Zohar, which is really a combination of a number of different type of works. There is the Zohar, the body of the Zohar itself, which is a vast commentary on Chamisha Chumshei Torah, 5 books of Moses, and the 5 scrolls, one of which we read this morning, Koheles. So it's a commentary, but it also has stories. It also has questions and answers. It has discussions. It's written in Aramaic. It's a vast text. It's poetry. It's amazing, amazing text. In there's also what's called Tikkunei Zohar. Tikkunei Zohar are 70 essays on the first word of the Torah, Bereshis. 70 essays on the first word of the Torah. Later on in history, in the 18th century, one of the great Kabbalists, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Lozato from Padua in Italy, he wrote his own version of Tikkunei Zohar, 70 essays on the last word of the Torah. So we have 70 essays on the first word, 70 essays on the last. Tikkunei Zohar, that's inside the Zohar. There's another section called Raya Mahemna, the faithful shepherd, that deals with the reasons for mitzvahs. What is the rationale behind various mitzvahs, but not in the sociological or historical or psychological manner which the Rambam deals with in the 3rd section of Moreh HaNevuchim Guide for the Perplexed, but in the sense of a Kabbalistic understanding of these mitzvahs, hooked into that reality which, as we said, a little beyond our senses and our experience. So that's the Raya Mahemna. So you have a number of different sections of the Zohar, and that became the central text. First came to light to the world not until the 1300s under Rav Moshe de Leon in Spain, but it studied, there were schools of Mekubalim in Catalonia, in Castilla, in Provence, and in the land of Israel. Some of them you've heard of, some of you have not. There was the Rabbi Yitzhak the Blind, there was Rav Abulafia, there was the Ramban, Nachmanides, Rabbi Yitzhak of Akko, and other great people, some of you have heard of, some have not. Doesn't really matter. There was that if you have heard of them or not, but there was the one with the coolest name always. I think was a Provençal Kabbalist who was named Shem Tov ben Shem Tov ibn Shem Tov. I mean, you couldn't get better than that. Imagine getting called up to the Torah like that. Seriously, right? Anyway, so now the Zohar studied by many people, and there were other Sforim, by the way, before the Zohar of Kabbalah. There were the Heichalois. Heichal is a palace, the divine palaces, the palaces of, so to speak, the divine presence, etc., existed before the Zohar. There is a book attributed to much earlier sources, Sefer Yetzirah, the book of formation, which starts with the idea of the world being really a smoke screen. Talks about the world, Ashan ka'ashan la'einaim. What does Ashan mean? Ashan means smoke. That the physical world, to a certain degree, the Sefer Yetzirah says, like a smoke screen. And Ashan, it points out, is actually an acronym for 3 Hebrew words. Ayin, Shin, Nun, Ashan, smoke, that means I cannot see reality. What is the smoke? Ashan, Olam, Shana, Nefesh. Olam means space, Shana, time, Nefesh, self. Basically, space, time, and self are the 3 aspects of our world that actually distort our vision a little bit. So to speak, the truth is infinite, beyond space and beyond time, and certainly beyond ego. And so to a certain degree, the world is an ashan le'enaim, smoke to the eyes, which we have the Torah to help us see through the smoke. So that is what the Torah is there. So that is one of the Sforim. And of course, it was studied throughout history by people following its publication, following its publicizing, and some of the most famous Mekubalim, I'm sure you've heard of. There was a Rav Yitzchak Luria, who was born in Israel when his father passed away. He and his mother went to Egypt, Cairo, where his uncle lived, after his father passed away, his uncle lived there. We actually have in the Cairo Geniza, which is currently most of it is in Cambridge University in England. I saw there a letter of the Arizal, a business letter from Rabbi Isaac Luria, who was working for his uncle. So there's a letter there signed Yitzchak Luria. Right? Business letter, nothing to do with anything Kabbalistic. People have to make a living. So while he was working for his uncle, he studied Zohar, he meditated on the Zohar, and he came up with a system described by one secular historian as the single most complex system of human thought ever created. And that's by someone who didn't understand it. And didn't appreciate it. So that's not, And now, during that time, so he's a young man, he's under 30. He decides to move to the center of Kabbalah, which was at the time Tzfas in the north of Israel. I'm sure many of you have been there, where the great Makubal Reb Moshe Cordovero lived. Reb Moshe Cordovero, of course, he wrote a vast sefer, a history and structure of all of Kabbalah from the earliest time until his time. And it's an unbelievable book, and a section of that book is known as Tomer Dvorah. Some of you may have studied it in preparation for Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, and it's called the Elima Rabbati, the great Elima Rabbati, right? And he said to some of his students, he says, someone's going to take over from me as the great teacher, and you'll know who it is when he sees a pillar of fire at my funeral. Anyway, the Arizal comes to Tzfas, and the great sages there figure, great bright young man who's come to learn Kabbalah within a very short period of time, bright young man who's come to teach us Kabbalah. He was there for maybe 3.5 years till he passed away. During that time, one of his great students, Reb Chaim Vital, managed to write down a fraction of what he learnt from the Arizal, and he took him about 20 years or so to organize all of that into a vast work called Eitz Chaim with about 20 volumes. So that's what he learned, a fraction of what he learned from the Arizal in like 2.5 years. So just to give you an idea of the hopelessness of us knowing all of it. But okay, I'm sorry, just an idea of the vastness of this literature. So that was the Arizal. Later on, people like Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, who I mentioned, I'm going to mention something from him as well, who of course had the first campus outreach program in history. He was living in Padua. There are only 2 universities in medieval Europe that allowed Jews to enter them without converting to Christianity. One of them was Padua. So Jewish students came from different parts of Europe to study medicine in the University of Padua. Even then, Jews study medicine. And the Ramchal, who was already, according to some of his students, was already knew most of Torah, most of the revealed Torah and most of the concealed Torah by the time he was approximately 18. By the time he was 20, he's teaching Kabbalah, and he has a group of students surrounding him. He was persecuted for this, obviously. And he was eventually he had revelations of a malach. A malach would reveal Torah. It was a low level of prophecy, but a malach, like Rabbi Yosef Karo, author of the Shulchan Aruch, had a malach who used to speak to him, give him Devrei Torah. So also the Ramchal had someone who used to do. One of his students, who was at the University Medical School in Padua, Rav Gordon from Eastern Europe, who had come there. He actually did graduate. I don't know how, because he became a great Makubal and Talmud Chacham during that time and did medical school. So there's a little bit of a challenge, folks. But in any case, he writes about his Rebbe, Ramchal, having revelations of Malachim, angels, and so on. And the Ramchal was so persecuted that he was not allowed to write Kabbalah. He had to leave Italy. He went to Amsterdam. In Amsterdam, he wrote 2 Sforim, which are his Kabbalistic understanding of the world in disguise. One describes the path of the human to Hashem. The other is the path of Hashem to the human being. and I'm sure you've heard of these books. One is called Mesilas Yesharim, the path of the just. That describes the path that the human takes to get from where he is or she is to Hashem. And the other is called Derech Hashem, the path of Hashem. That is the path that Hashem took in creation, in the structure of the world to get to the human being. So there are two parallel books. Derech Hashem, by the way, is structured on that idea of Olam Shana Nefesh, space, time, self. And that's how he structures the book, describing HaKadosh Baruch Hu's creation of the world, describing HaKadosh Baruch Hu's divine providence over the world, and describing the role of the human being in all of that, and the mitzvahs, etc. One short idea from him, which is, again, I said I'd get back to Bereshis, and we always have to get back to Bereshis, don't we? Right? So to get back to Bereshis is, and the first letter is interesting. You look at the Chumash, and it starts with what letter? Base. Symbolically, if I was writing the Chumash, something which I've thought of, right? If I was writing the Chumash, I would have started with an Aleph. I would think that would be symbolically a much better place to start. Aleph, 1, right? I mean, the graphics would look nice. I mean, just start with Aleph, and then go to base. Instead, the Torah starts with the second letter, base. Very interesting, very interesting. So why is that so? And there are many explanations for this. Let me give you one, the correct one. But I'll give you one. No, there's series. There are quite a few. But this is one, which is the following. When God created the world, the act of creation was already an act that obscured the true oneness of Hashem. Because once there's creation, that means there's a Becher, the creator, and there is a Bria, creation. There is the Boreh, and there is the Nivra, the creator and the created. That's already a bit of separation. It's already separation. That's already not oneness anymore. And not only that, but you may have physical and spiritual, Shamayim and Oretz. You may have Mashpia and Mushba, the influence and the one who is influenced, and so on and so forth. So the creation of the world, the physical world, is a creation of what's called two-ness. Not two-ness in North Africa, but two-ness with a W. Two-ness. That is to say more than one. There is the appearance of plurality. There is the appearance of multiple beings, multiple reality. Now, in truth, there is only one. Aleph, the oneness of Hashem. So creation, the reason the Torah starts with base is because creation is base. It is two. It's now, so to speak, Hashem and the creature. What is our job ultimately? The answer, I think, is, if you look in the Mishnah Brura, where he talks about how to write the letters, there's a specific way we have to write the letters for Sefer Torah, Tefillin, Mezuzahs. It's called, the font is called Ashuris. It's not on word, right? Ashuris, actually it probably is. Anyway, but there's the font called Ashuris, and there are specific halachas, laws of how to write them. In the Mishnah Brura, he tells me that the base has to be written with a point at the top, uketz, pointing up, and the bottom, an uketz pointing back, a little thing pointing back, it's like a line pointing back. And he quotes a Yerushalmi in Chagiga that says, why does the base have 2 points? One pointing up, one pointing back. If you ask the base, who created you? It points up to Hashem. If you ask what's his name, it points back to the Aleph and says his name is one. Very beautiful Gemara, right? The base is creation, and creation speaks to us. Creation speaks to us. It points up to Hashem, that there's another reality beyond the physical reality, as I gave you some examples from astronomy and from I guess carpentry, but etc. Right? And in addition, it points to his name, to the oneness of Hashem. So if you ask the base who created you, it points up. If you ask it what's his name, it points back to the Aleph. So what is the job of all of creation? What is the purpose of the entire Torah? What is the purpose of every single mitzvah? What is the purpose of all of it? Is to get from the base to the Aleph. Whether it is through unity of my thought, speech, and action, one way that's accomplished is through tefillah, through prayer, which Rabbi Volozhiner, student of the Gaon of Vilna, one of the great Kabbalists, one of the greatest Kabbalists of later times, the Gaon of Vilna, his student Rabbi Volozhiner wrote a book called Nefesh HaChaim, And there he says that tefillah, prayer, is the ultimate in unification of the soul, the nefesh, the ruach, and the neshama. The thought, the actions, and speech. But that's what you're doing. Every time we do a mitzvah is an act of finding Hashem in this world, of finding Hashem, the unity. Just to mention something from the Tikkunei Zohar. Tikkunei Zohar says, it's interesting, the word mitzvah, mem tzadi vav hey, actually is the name of God. The last two letters of the word mitzvah, vav hey, are the last two letters of Hashem's name, Yud and Hey, Vav and Hey. So the last two letters of mitzvah spell out the last two letters of God's name, Vav Hey. But you know there's a system which our sages use in the Gemara and also in the Zohar and the Medrash, which is called Atbash, in which the Aleph, the first letter of the Torah, of the Aleph base, equals the last letter, Aleph substitutes for Taf, Beit for Shin, Atbash, etc. Right? You get it? Figure it out? The idea behind it, in parentheses, I heard from Rabbi Shapiro, is basically that the first thought equals the last action. Sof ma'aseh, the end of action. B'machshava techila is the beginning of thought. Because you see, if I'm an architect, so I wanted to be when I was a little kid. So the architect, the first thing you think of is the complete house. That's Aleph. That's the first thought. When do you get to the complete house? The last action, right? We making sense? You following? So the Aleph equals the Taf. The last thought is the most practical thought, which is get a permit from the local council. What's the first action? Get a permit from the local council. So the last thought meets the first action. The first thought meets the last action. Aleph, Taf, Beit, Shi, and so on and so forth. Very beautiful. Close parentheses, you can continue listening now. So now, the idea, if you look, the letter Mem is the 10th last letter of the Aleph base. So what does it parallel? Correct, Yud. Gryffindor, 10 points. And Hey is the 5th last letter of the Aleph base. It parallels, Tzadi is the 5th last letter of the alphabet, so it parallels Hey. So Mem in Atbash is Yud, and Tzadi is Hey. And so you have the name of Hashem concealed, Mem Tzadi, and revealed, Vav Hey. And so when we do a mitzvah, we're revealing Hashem either in time, in space, in self, in every situation. And we are getting a little closer from the base back to the Aleph. The obscuring of reality of Ayin, Olam, Shana, Nefesh, space, time, ego, are erased, so to speak, by the smoke screen, by the Torah, by the mitzvahs. And we are decoding them as we go on, getting from the base back to the Aleph. And the truth is, to achieve, when are we happiest? Usually when we have a level, when we've tasted some of the Aleph, some of the unity. We spend, much of the Earth's population spends a lot of time and money and effort and emotional investment trying to have unity with one other person. Many people are not successful. But that unity, if a person does achieve that oneness with your wife, Be'ezras Hashem, if you don't have, and Be'ez Hashem you will, and those, right, that oneness, right, that is unbelievable. Unbelievable simcha, unbelievable pleasure. Because the person's experiencing a little taste of Aleph, of the oneness of Hashem. When you're in a group of friends, you might be dancing together or singing together or learning together or davening together. There's a taste of that oneness, that unity. I was at the Koisel, Birchas Kahanim. You know, beautiful. Hundreds, I don't know how many Jews there, but there may have been 100,000, maybe more, all together, listening to the blessings of the Kahanim. That's a taste of the Aleph. That's really a taste of the Aleph, the oneness. And we experience it in other ways. Sociologically, you're all familiar, I'm sure, with the phenomenon of bageling, right? When you meet another Jew somewhere, and the Jew, you look Jewish, the other person doesn't necessarily look Jewish, so when they come within approximately 5 feet of you, they'll have an overwhelming urge to identify themselves to you as Jewish, using some Yiddish or Hebrew term, or like Happy Yortzeit or something like that. Right? Ever had that experience? You ever had that experience? It happens to me all the time. You get bageled. It's called being bageled. A Jew comes here. I was in Harrods in London. There's a couple next to me, upper crust English couple. He's got a cravat. They're looking at some object d'art, glancing in my direction occasionally. And I thought to myself, I feel a bagel coming on. And the guy says to his wife, he says, Harriet, dear. She says, yes, George. He says, oy vey, this is quite expensive. Oy vey! That was a bagel. That was his way of saying, I am Jewish. But you can't really, I lead tours in the summer. So I was leading a tour to China a number of years. We just got back from India this summer. Unbelievable. So in China, I'm with a group of Jews, primarily from Flatbush Borough Park in Chicago. All religious Jews. We stood out a little bit in Shanghai. We're in the Imperial Tea Gardens. We're walking through, making more noise than probably the entire city of Shanghai. And towards us, there is a group of people, slightly Middle Eastern in appearance, no yarmulkes amongst them, not dressed in accordance with Jewish tradition. And as they approach us, they see us, and they start singing the worst Jewish song in history, Hava Nagila. That was a group bagel. They were Israelis. That was their way of saying, screaming, we're Jewish too, right? And it was very beautiful, despite the horrible song, right? But it was amazing. It's unbelievable. I was in the subway in New York, actually, and there was a busker who was playing Mozart Eine kleine Nacht music on his violin, which I was enjoying. And he was type of like, and I was facing this way, and he was there. I turned around to see if the train was coming. He sees my yarmulke, he switches to Hava Nagila. I said, you're anti-Semite, I'm not going to give you a cent now, you know. But you see, bageling is a manifestation of the desire of the soul to find oneness. I want to be united with other Jews, even if I'm very distant, even if I'm like totally secular. Here I am in China, or whatever it is, or India, Goa, right, at a party on the beach post-army. I'm not going to do that. But basically, when you see another Jew, wow. And it's an amazing thing. Wherever you go in the world, it's like I always find Israelis, even if they apparently look secular, are hanging out where? With other Israelis. They're singing Hebrew songs. They go to Chabad for Shabbos. It's unbelievable. That's the soul getting from the base back to the Aleph. What is a mitzvah? The revelation of Hashem in space and in time, etc., and in self. And that is ultimately what Kabbalah, much of Kabbalah is actually about, this idea, the revealing of the hidden esoteric dimension, that dimension of Aleph that is found in everything, the Yud and the Hey, which is found in the Mem and the Tzadik, the Nekudas, the Nitzots HaKadosh, the holy spark that is found in every Jew. That's all part of that revelation of this incredible oneness. And that's why ultimately the Torah starts with the base, not with the Aleph. But what does start with an Aleph is interesting, is the thing that introduces all of the mitzvahs to humanity. What is the encapsulation? The table of contents of the Torah. The Ramban wrote a book called Tariag Mitzvos Hayotzos Ma'asera Sadibros. Not the catchiest title, but what it means is the 613 commandments derive from the 10. Anoichi starts with Aleph. Because you see, that is the means to get to the Aleph. Bereshis is the challenge. The world, space, time, ego, etc. And Anoichi, those Asera Sadibros, which really encapsulate and contain within them all 630 mitzvahs. See the Ramban, Kol Kisvei Ramban, Charles B. Chevelle has a beautiful, it's translated, right? So he shows how it all comes from there. So that's what the Aleph is. That's our path to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And so, again, I just want to give you a little bit, and it's interesting, we actually achieve that through our actions. And there's very interesting, the Ramchal points this out. You know, Yaakov has a dream in which he sees a ladder connecting heaven and earth. And there are angels, malachim, olim v'yordim bo. They go up and down the ladder. And many Mefarshim, not all, but some, I shouldn't say all, many, probably, some Mefarshim ask the question, if you dream of angels and a ladder, which direction should they be going first? Well, down and then up. Makes sense, down and then up. So there are a number of, I just going to mention parenthetically, the Maharal's explanation is very beautiful. And it actually ties into what Rabbi was talking about before, which is that the Maharal says, the Rashi, first of all, Rashi, who from France, Troyes in France, 1040 to 1105. One of my kids came home from school, I asked him, what did you do today? He said, nothing, which is usually accurate. And, but I said, no, seriously. He said, we learned about Rashi. I said, what did you learn about Rashi? He said, Rabbi said that Rashi lived during recess. I said, what? What did Rabbi actually say? He said, Rashi lived from 1040 to 1105. I was like, what? So anyway, no Nobel Prizes there. Okay, so I actually asked for my tuition check back that month. But anyway, so Rashi comments that the angels going up are the angels of Eretz Yisrael leaving Yaakov. And now he's got the angels of Chutz La'aretz are coming down the ladder to accompany him. Maharal asks, not on that place, but later on in the Chumash, Maharal asks, what do you mean? He hasn't left Israel yet. He had the dream in Yerushalayim. He's not left Israel. So why are the angels of Israel leaving him? And it's interesting, later on in the Torah, he's coming back from Chutz La'aretz, diaspora, to Israel, and he crosses a river, and it says he meets some angels. Vayikra Shem HaMakom Hahu Machanayim. He called that place because he met two camps of angels. Rashi there says angels of the diaspora were leaving him, angels of Israel were accompanying him. Fascinating. He wasn't yet in Israel. So the Maharal says, beautiful idea, he says, your religious, your spiritual status is not determined by where you are now, but by where you're heading. In physics, but not by the scalar, but by the vector. Right. In other words, right, Yaakov has decided to go to Chutz La'aretz. The angels of Israel leave him. Angels of Chutz La'aretz. Kobi is gone. Right? Kobi, Dudu, they've left. Right? Now he's got, Craig and Bradley, whatever. Right? But basically that's, it ties in. But I didn't want to, that close parentheses, I didn't want to really talk about Mara. I like that shot, so I wanted to mention. The Ramchal says an amazing thing. He says, the angels going up the ladder are the angels that we create through our actions. And the angels that come down the ladder are the angels of Hashem's reaction to our actions. So really the human is at the center of creation, and it's we who create that energy and those angels that we send up the ladder to Shamayim, and the things that come down the ladder from Shamayim, so to speak, whatever the energy is, that is a reflection of what we created. And so that we are at the center of creation. So our actions actually connect. We are heaven and earth, Shamayim, the spiritual, as the Ramban says in that first pasuk, and the physical, connected by the ladder, the Sulam, which is like Sinai, it's the same numerical value as Sinai, the Mount Sinai, which is like the ladder connecting heaven and earth. And we send messages up, and Hashem responds in turn. So that's another idea from one of the great Kabbalists, the Ramchal. And just to give you, to end with this idea, because I think our time is out, the Ramchal just says another interesting idea. We know that there is a Gemara that says that the human will be one of the principles of Jewish belief. According to the Rambam, principle number 13 is belief in the resurrection of the dead. It's explicit in the book of Daniel, but that Hashem will bring to life those who have died. Resurrection of the dead. Yechezkel sees a valley of dry bones. So the Gemara says there's a bone in the human being from which everything will come from, so to speak. But in addition, the Zohar says there's also something called kasta de chiyusa, the moisture of life that has to be there. So there's a bone and there's a moisture of life, meaning there's like a physical component from which things will be recreated. And then there is the moisture of life, that's like a spiritual component from which everything will be recreated. The Ramchal says that's paralleled in the Jewish people as well. He says the Koisel HaMa'aravi, which you are here so close to. Koisel HaMa'aravi says that's the bone in the Jewish people from which the temple and which the Beis Hamikdash, from which Jewish people will be revived from. He says the Kasta de Chiyusa, the moisture, is the Shechina, the divine presence that rests in the holy city of Yerushalayim and at the Koisel Maravi especially. So you have a tremendous chus, a merit, to be here in Yerushalayim, in the place where the Shechina, what we mean by Shechina, the divine presence, God permeates all of time and all of place. As the Zohar says, Leis asar de panui minei, there is no place devoid of Hashem. What do we mean when we say Shechina, the divine presence is here or there? So the Sforno, famous Italian Perush on the Chumash. Ovadia Sforno is a doctor as well. So the Sforno says, he says, in the same way as we have a soul, but you cannot perceive the soul equally in every part of the human body. My elbow, you look at my elbow, you can't say, oh, the neshama, right? You can't see that. You look at someone's face, you can perceive the presence of the soul. So the Sforno says that is similar. Yerushalayim is like the face, where you can perceive. Of course, Hashem's presence permeates all of time and all of space equally. There is no, if it didn't, they wouldn't exist. But yet, there are places where Hashem allows us a greater level of perception of that hidden reality, the Torah's Hasod, the total reality, the reality beyond space, time, and ego, the reality beyond the senses, the reality that Aristotle couldn't see, the reality that the Ramban says is the reality that we can access only through Kabbalah, through tradition, person to person. You are here in the place where the curtain has been ripped aside a little bit, the smoke is a little less dense, you have a little of a clearer vision, and we have what we need for the ultimate, the completion of the Geula, the completion of the redemption, which has already started. I mean, we are here at Israel, it's unbelievable, and gathering the exiles, and here we are in a Beis Medrash in Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh, learning Torah together is historically ludicrous. It's beyond imagination. Our presence here, learning Torah, our presence here in Yerushalayim, our presence here, Hoshana Rabbah in Yerushalayim is miraculous. We have to appreciate that and take advantage of the tremendous gift that Hashem has given us, the kasta de chiyusa, the moisture of life, the shechina, the divine presence, the physical components of that, like the Kosel HaMa'aravi, and the ability to perceive so much more clearly what we cannot see anywhere else, and what we have a hard time seeing even here, but which with effort we can find. And through this we should be zoicha that next year we'll celebrate Simchas Beis HaSheva Hoshana Rabbah in the Beis HaMikdash. Amen.